the radicals and other congressional Republicans said, if you support our version of Reconstruction, one that honors the legacy of the Union war effort, you will vote for our candidates. The result was an overwhelming Northern victory for the radical or congressional version of Reconstruction and the 14th Amendment. And that's in the election of '66. So in '67, Congress passes the first, second, and third Reconstruction Acts, which begins radical Reconstruction. Radical Reconstruction or Congressional Reconstruction is that 10-year period when Congress had mandated that the southern states enfranchise African American males as voters, and those African American males form governments along with scallywags and carpetbaggers, Republican state governments in the South. Oh, who were the carpetbaggers? We said, okay, in radical Reconstruction, 3 groups joined together politically to form Republican regimes. The carpetbaggers were whom?
Northerners who were trying to make profit?
Yes, well, not necessarily. Northerners who came south for whatever reasons. Any Northerner who came to live, work, run for office, serve in government, be a missionary, be a minister for any reason, who came to the South was considered to be a carpetbagger. Andrew, who were the scallywags?
Were they the ones that they were sport of the North that lived in the South?
Yes, they were Southerners who now embraced the new Republican governments in these states. They were considered traitors to their race, traitors to the section of their country. And then we said that most white Southerners opposed these Republican governments. These Republican governments were instituted at the end of a bayonet. So the Union Army came to the South, forced the South to hold these conventions, to have elections, and to establish these governments that were coalitions of these 3 groups. And remember, we said the remarkable thing about radical or congressional Reconstruction is that African Americans, in some cases former slaves, voted and participated in government. And we said, remember, there's this whole gigantic discussion, were these governments corrupt and inept and, inefficient, or were they forward-looking and establishing, kind of a social structure that would progress the South, and there was this gigantic debate. I mean, it is clearly true that these radical regimes advanced sort of a social agenda that pushed the South forward. They built schools, they attempted to build infrastructure. It is also true that they were in some cases corrupt. It was also true that they were vigorously opposed by the majority of the white population in the South. And what was the symbol of that opposition? What organization, Alex?
The Ku Klux Klan?
Yes, the Ku Klux Klan, we said, was an attempt, organizations, covert organizations, secret organizations, terrorist organizations that attempted to terrorize this coalition out of power. So powerful was the Klan that the federal government passed legislation that attempted to successfully subdue them for a period of time. But eventually, the Klan was successful. And by 1877, all of the ex-Confederate states had fallen under what we called Redeemer rule. Oh, incidentally, we say that radical Reconstruction lasted about 10 years, that during that 10-year period, the southern states for varying periods of time were under radical regimes. But the whole thing ends with the last 3 states falling under democratic rule in 1877. What ends it? What ends radical Reconstruction? We identified a specific event that ended radical Reconstruction. Anybody recall? Yes, go ahead, Sri.
You mentioned which the Democrats had.
Yes. The Compromise of '77. What was the Compromise of '77? This ends radical Reconstruction. What was the compromise? I'll give you part of it. Hayes becomes the president. That's part of the compromise. What's the other part? Go ahead, Billy. They removed Southern troops from the South. Now, as a part of this whole battle over Reconstruction, Johnson is impeached. He's impeached. Remember, at first, Johnson is going to try to use the power of the presidency to impede radical or congressional reconstruction. Eventually, Congress decides to attempt to remove him from office by impeachment and trial and conviction. What did Johnson do to merit articles of impeachment being filed against him, voted upon, and him being tried on these articles of impeachment? What did he do? What was his sin? Yes.
He tried to fire his Secretary of War without asking Congress's permission.
Right. So that was a violation of the Tenure of Office Act. Right? The Tenure of Office Act. Was Johnson removed from office? He was impeached, but he was not removed from office. Maybe he was not removed from office because at least some Republicans understood the ramifications of doing so. I mean, what the Republicans did is pass a law that they were pretty sure that Johnson was going to violate. And then when he violated it, they impeached him on high crimes and misdemeanors. Had they been able to convict him of such, then every majority could have done that to a minority president. They could have passed a law that they knew the president was sure to violate, and then impeached him, for violating that law. And so this establishes some pretty significant, important things regarding separation of power. Ulysses S. Grant is elected to the presidency in 1868. Johnson wanted the presidential nomination from the Democrats, doesn't get it. Horatio Seymour is the Democratic candidate, and he almost wins. Horatio Seymour almost beats Grant. What's the difference in that election? And how does that connect to the 15th Amendment? In the election of 1868, Grant, the hero of the Union, takes on Horatio Seymour, a Democrat, a party that was tainted by secession. And Grant almost loses to Horatio Seymour. He wins by a significant number of popular votes. But there was something important about that popular vote that connects to the 15th Amendment. What was it, dear J.R.? Yes, go ahead. Yes. The African Americans enfranchised under radical Reconstruction overwhelmingly voted for Grant. That being the case, what do the Republicans push through Congress that passes in 1870? We just mentioned it several times. Go ahead, Isabel. The 15th Amendment. So the 15th Amendment gives us 3 Civil War amendments, Vassetti. The 13th Amendment freed the slaves. The 14th Amendment made the slaves citizens. And the 15th Amendment gave them the right to vote. So seeing the importance of the African American vote in the 1860 election, Republicans pushed through a constitutional amendment that prohibits states from disenfranchising voters on the basis of race, which is the 15th Amendment. What's the most distinctive thing about the Grant administration? What's the most distinctive? Go ahead.
It was basically really corrupt.
Corruption. The most infamous incident of corruption is something called credit mobilier. Take a look at that. It involves railroad funding. So corrupt was the Grant administration that in 1872, Republicans themselves are going to, some Republicans themselves are going to say, Grant is too corrupt. And the Republicans that kind of abandoned Grant in the 72 election was a faction known as the Mugwumps. Remember we said that the Republicans eventually divided into 3 factions. The Stalwarts, who were led by whom? The Stalwarts were led by Roscoe Conkling. The Half-Breeds, Ben, who were led by whom? The Senator. James Blaine of Maine, who is our favorite. The Mugwumps don't have any kind of particular leader, but what makes the Mugwumps distinctive? What are they all about, Andrew, the Mugwumps?
I don't know.
Go ahead, Alex. The mugwumps are the reformers. They are the ones that want good government. They are the ones that are frustrated by the corruption of the Grant administration. So they are willing to bolt the Republican Party because Grant is so corrupt. And remember, they nominate Horace Greeley to be an independent Republican in the election, and then the Democrats nominate Greeley as well. Grant defeats Greeley in '72 and is reelected. Now, Grant serves his term through '76, and when '76 comes along in our discussion, we said, okay, Grant had served 2 terms, all right? The Civil War had ended in '65. Radical Reconstruction is going to end in '77, and then we usher in a period of politics that we talked about at length. We said in the Gilded Age, the time period 1865 to 1900, during this period, there were some distinctive features of politics on a national level. One was widespread participation. We said Gilded Age politics, huge voter turnouts, lots of interest, lots of excitement, lots of enthusiasm. But there were not issues that were really debated in the election. We said that, there were kind of issueless elections, lackluster leaders, but there was this huge kind of participation. And we kind of talked about that. We said, well, what could this be? I mean, if there weren't issues and there weren't leaders, how and why would there be such widespread participation? Why would people be so interested? We also pointed out that there was widespread corruption in both parties on every level, buying votes, elections were stolen, all kinds of terrible kind of corrupt things were happening, yet people flocked to the polls during this time. And we gave a couple of reasons why. One, we said, look, the parties were very evenly matched, parity. Every election was hotly contended. Hotly contended. We also said that there were local issues that were emotional, religious, ethnic, and that the Civil War had a legacy of emotional issues that got people to the polls. Radical Reconstruction was something that Democrats deeply resented. The bloody shirt, the war itself, was something that Republicans deeply resented. And so these things brought people to the polls. And so we have, kind of this turbulent period of politics. We also said that something that brought people to the polls for both parties was patronage. Patronage was this idea of the winning political faction rewarding its supporters with government jobs and contracts. And this was really something that kind of kept both parties alive, this patronage. Now, in this time period, we said we went through a series of what your textbook described as forgettable presidents. Starting with Hayes, a Republican that was elected in 1876 in this contested election that eventually results in the Compromise of '77. Hayes serves for 1 term. Oh, Hayes was from Ohio, which was a doubtful state. And remember we said there was this swing and swash of states, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, New York, New Jersey, that were doubtful states that kind of determined the elections. Hayes was from Ohio. What other Republicans were from Ohio? Hayes was from Ohio.